Hey everybody, welcome into the Total Sports Live Fantasy Pod, possibly to be named something else later. More on that in just a second. Week 2 coming at you right now. Fantasy football, crazy week 1 that we had after an awesome preview show. Make sure you go check that out. We'll tell you that more about that in just a second. I am Keaton Nichols. Make sure you follow me at Keaton D. Nichols on the socials. And of course, we are joined by the finest of fantasy gurus that the TSL family has to offer. Jovan Alford, founder of the TSL brand himself, joining us as well. Welcome, Jovan.
Appreciate. Glad to be back on, doing this with y'all after we did the first time. So glad that we're doing it again. It's a lot of things that happen in week 1. Some things that can be explained, other things that cannot be explained. So
and
can't wait to talk about it with you.
And to help us break down the potentially unexplainable is Harrison Brown-Russo coming at us live as well. Harrison, welcome to the program as well.
Keaton, always a pleasure, man. Jovan, likewise. Looking forward to breaking down, like y'all said, a crazy week of fantasy football, and we're already underway in the week 2. Thursday Night Football is going on as we're recording.
As we speak to this day.
Looking forward to, trying to get another dub this week in fantasy.
Absolutely. We'll talk about that here in just a second. Before we get going, make sure you follow us on social media. You can follow Total Sports Live on Twitter at, get this, right? Total Sports Live. It's easy, at Total Sports Live. And also make sure you check out the podcast of the same name on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, and of course, Anchor, holding it down. Get it on Anchor? Anyway, let's get into the conversation right away. Guys, my teams, I have 3 fantasy teams. This year, I tried to kind of keep it limited. Right now, I am sitting at 1-2 for those fantasy teams. I got a win in one league against Jovan. Hey, made me feel pretty accomplished this week. Sorry, somebody had to win the matchup, of course, in this particular case. But my other 2 teams did extremely poorly. What about you guys? Like, what was the success of your teams? Do you guys have multiple teams? And how well did you do?
Yeah, I split in week 1. I went 1-1, caught a dub in the TSL Fantasy League. Encouraged about that team. One of my strategies was to load up on running backs, and that is a team where it worked out on. I think I have about 4 or 5 guys that I'm comfortable with right now. I actually wound up sitting CEH tonight in the Thursday Night Football game just because I wanted to get Kareem Hunt in there. But on my other team, that strategy kind of wound up backfiring and biting me. I don't have many receivers. My receivers are Allen Robinson and Hunter Renfrow. So you can kind of feel it right. Exactly. You can feel it right there. And this is kind of getting into something we're about to talk about. I might be looking to make some trades for receivers in that league. I might be looking to leverage one of those running backs, try to go get somebody a little bit more established at that receiver position. So that's kind of where I'm at right now. It might be time to make some moves in one of my leagues.
Jovan, how'd you do? Well, I mean, we partially know because I ruined it, but yeah.
I was about to say, partially already ruined it, but I have far too many teams to keep count on know what happened in multiple results. I will say the overarching thing for me was not taking the opportunity to start a guy like James Robinson in week 1, just based off of him coming off an injury, and we didn't really see him in the preseason.
Yeah.
And for me, I was thinking, I don't know, even though Peterson said, leading up to week 1 that he was going to be the 3-down back and he's going to be the team's RB1. I didn't want to so much believe it just because knowing the type of injury that he had back in December and only not even being a fully 1 year removed. So my dumb self decided to say, I'm going to go Damian Harris because Patriots really ain't got no wide receiver. So they're going to have to run the ball, right? He's going to find his wings at the end zone because that's what he did last year. And it didn't pan out for me in multiple leagues in that situation. So me not starting James Robinson was probably a big one. I know in your league, Keaton, that was kind of probably one of the biggest things for me because I think Robinson gave me like almost close to 20 points and sitting on the bench. And it didn't go well because CeeDee Lamb didn't do anything, but that was more so the product of the Cowboys offense, and Alvin Kamara was pretty much a no-show. So yeah, my overarching thing was not playing James Robinson when I probably should have against the Washington defense.
Yeah, I mean, and for there was, I'm sure a lot of folks, there were probably 2 or 3 games just within our league, Jovan, that we're in, and also in the TSL league as well that all 3 of us are in which maybe a start or sit could have made the difference in you winning or losing in week 1. And so immediately, I wanted to kind of have this conversation a little bit about roster construction and strategy here, which is something that I think we should come back to throughout the year because your roster does change. For some of us, it changes drastically throughout the year. For some of us, trades and the thought of trades, Harrison, you just mentioned, are beginning right now. We're not going to give it 3 weeks. We're not going to give it 4 weeks and see how the roster shakes up. A lot of that panic comes after the first week. Is that kind of thing justified? I'm 1-2 in my leagues. In your estimation, should I then go out, whether or not it was a bad start or not, and start thinking about how to improve my team if I'm down 1 after week 1?
I think the big thing with the draft is you want to kind of get the base of your roster. You want to get your, superstars. You want to get your core group. But after that, you're really betting on upside. You're maybe taking some personal preferences. If you're a fan of a team, you might lean that way. It's really all about getting the base of your roster. And then from there, you got to build it out through waiver wires. Waiver wire pickups can drastically change the course of your season, especially this time of year. 2 years ago, James Robinson was a free agent at this time. Last year, Elijah Mitchell was a free agent at this time. They went on to be solidified running backs that are now, top 5 round picks. That's kind of how this works. You can find waiver wire guys that can affect your season, and then you can go out and make trades. I mean, we're going to talk about it a little bit with Dak Prescott's injury, but if a team needs a quarterback and you're a little bit light at receiver or light at running back, and you have one of those top tier quarterbacks, and maybe you drafted a backup like Trey Lance that you think is going to have a good season. Wasn't a great start, but maybe you trust in him, or maybe you trust in Matt Ryan out in Indy, something like that. If you want to stream quarterbacks of that nature, maybe you trade your quarterback, rebuild your roster that way. So I think the big thing with fantasy is you want to get the base of your roster in the draft, but then you want to be flexible from there. Try to find ways to add to your roster, make your roster better, give yourself a better chance each week by just trying to get the best players overall.
Yeah, I think that's, oftentimes, you're trying to improve your roster each and every single week, in some way, shape, or form. And I like what you said there about free agents. I do think that free agency is probably a more appealing path to improving your team at this point. Jovan, is there anything at this point that you're looking at and saying, win or lose after week 1? Is there any reason for a major shakeup? Let's say making a big splash trade, let's say after week 1 as a way of potentially salvaging the season, or, potentially, preventing yourself from falling too behind in the standings. Is that ever justified in your mind?
I don't think so, just because week 1 is just a snapshot. It's not a complete picture. I forgot who I was telling this to. I think in fantasy, you can't make a true, jurisdiction, I don't know if that's the right word, on your team until after week 4. So you get after that first quarter mark, because a lot of things are very very up and down for the first few weeks, as a lot of these teams in offenses, they didn't really play in the preseason. So this is really a trial and error to see who's going to be that guy and who's going to be that guy. And then you also got to factor in injuries as well. We're seeing a lot of, just in week 2 alone, we're seeing a lot of soft tissue injuries happening right now with hammies and quads that are going to, shake up some decisions on start systems and things like that. So I wouldn't panic and make a big trade, because I think there's obviously, great options. I think at pretty much every position in fantasy, right? If you're, had Dak, I don't think you need to panic, right? Because I think you can, if you're lucky, depending on your league, maybe you get a Jameis Winston, right? Who's, not on the higher bar of being owned, being rostered, maybe around that 50%, level. But a guy like him, a guy like Marcus Mariota, who gives you a little bit of that dual threat. So you do get some extra points in that way. And we all know, even at running back and wide receiver, right? There's always guys on the waiver wire sitting there that say, hey, this guy is going to be starting for such and such because such and such is hurt. If Leonard Fournette's hurt, then the next guy up is Rashad Wright, right? Or if Alvin Kamara is up hurt, then Mark Ingram's next up. Now, obviously, they're not top priority on your list, but unlike quarterback, wide receiver, running back, even tight end to a certain extent, there's no need to rush and be like, oh my God, I got to go make a move, just because we also haven't had no really crazy season-ended injury yet as well.
Yeah, so, I mean, just if your guys, obviously injuries will force you into different roster moves at different times, but there's no real need to, I think the overall consensus here, no real need to necessarily rush to do those sort of things. There's a lot that you could probably find out. I mean, even if your team goes 0-2, this is a 14-game fantasy season now with
Yep.
this extra game thrown in here. So most of us are playing 14 games. You can recover after 0-2 in your league. We don't have 32 teams in most fantasy league. I don't think any fantasy league has 32 teams. So it doesn't necessarily follow that same structure in the NFL. I think people get, kind of down on their fantasy teams sometimes after 0-1, and also after underperformances. We'll talk about duds here later in the show as well, but underperformances can really have an effect on that kind of thing too. So we'll get into our duds in just a second. But Jovan, you mentioned it, Dak Prescott, kind of the biggest injury piece, the biggest, sort of block of content that I've seen this week on a lot of fantasy, sort of programs is what to do to replace Dak Prescott. He's going to miss somewhere between 3 and, maybe 7 or 8 weeks with a broken thumb, depending on how quickly he can recover from surgery this week. So first question up, gentlemen, is there a Cowboy that you would feel confident starting with Cooper Rush at quarterback? What does this do to the value of some of the other stars like a CeeDee Lamb and Ezekiel Elliott on that offense?
I think a lot of people drafted CeeDee Lamb as a starting receiver, so I think you're still starting CeeDee Lamb. I think a lot of people drafted Ezekiel Elliott as a starting running back, so maybe you're not running away from that yet. I think there's a little bit of cause for concern there, especially after last week, and now you're looking at a weaker offense overall. I think where it really starts to be a concern for me is guys like Dalton Schultz. I'm a little worried about Dalton Schultz this week, and then just kind of moving down the list from there. Tony Pollard and just the Cowboys group as a whole. Don't think Michael Gallup will be back this week, but when he's back, there will be concern there. So it's definitely a hit to the Cowboys offense as a whole. It's certainly going to be a factor to watch over these next month or two and to see how those guys perform. I think CeeDee Lamb still holds a lot of fantasy value, especially in PPR leagues. I think that he'll still get a high volume of passes. He'll catch 5, 6, 7 passes a game, 50-plus yards, maybe add in a touchdown there. I think there's value there. I think Ezekiel Elliott still has a clear hold on the running back room, in large part because of Tony Pollard's struggles in pass protection. I just think it's going to be hard for them to get him on the field in the backfield and a lot of those passing downs. I think they might have to do it more in the slot, which is something they've been open to, but I just kind of see that as the role for Tony Pollard right now. He's obviously going to get his carries and be a factor in their running game, but Ezekiel Elliott just gives you so much more in the pass protection game. I think that's going to help Zeke's value in PPR. I think Cooper Kupp is going to look to take some dump off, just quick check down situations. And while Tony Pollard might be the more talented pass catching back, I think Zeke just might be in those situations more because he's a better pass blocker. So that's kind of where I'm at on the Cowboys right now. We're in this Philadelphia area. It certainly helps the Eagles' chances in terms of real football in the division. So you never wish ill on anyone. I'm a fan of Dak. I hate to see him struggle with another injury, but just in terms of a pure football sense, certainly a downgrade going from Dak Prescott to Cooper Rush this week.
Yeah, it's going to be tough to figure out, and we talked a little bit about this concept before the show. How does this team win games now? Like, you have a game plan in there with your very highly paid quarterback, franchise quarterback. You've got stars here. You've got CeeDee Lamb. You've got Ezekiel Elliott. That's the plan coming into the season for Dallas to win football games this year. But what then becomes the plan when I think about what's going to be successful in fantasy? It's usually a game plan that works. What are the Cowboys coaches thinking at this point, Jovan, about how this offense is going to flow? Who do you have confidence in, or should we just not have confidence in any of these guys and say, look, this coaching staff is just going to try and eke out a few wins before Dak gets back to stay in the hunt?
I think like Harrison said, right, you're not going to bench like CeeDee Lamb. You're not going to bench Ezekiel Elliott. And like you said, Dalton Schultz, maybe just because we don't know how that's going to trickle down effect, but you're not benching those guys. So I think the best way to think about it is just temper your expectations for these guys. Like, whatever you think they were going to do, like, kind of bring it down a couple of notches. Like CeeDee Lamb, we were thinking that this was a guy that was going to, be 15, 20 points a game in fantasy, maybe this season. Maybe with Cooper Rush, he's around like 12 to 15. That's still very good. But for where a lot of people drafted CeeDee Lamb round 2, round 3, it's not the production that you expect to see. So I think you temper your expectations with those guys. I think we're going to definitely see a lot of Ezekiel Elliott just because that Cowboys offensive line isn't the best either. They're battered right now with injuries on that offensive line. So the best remedy for that is to keep heat off of Cooper Rush is to run that football. And Zeke Elliott, I think, he looked solid in week 1. but obviously the game kind of got away from Dallas to where they were passing the ball a little bit. And that's also a Mike McCarthy philosophy. They like to throw the ball around a lot. So I think they're going to continue to run the ball. So I think this is definitely going to be Zeke Elliott time. They paid him a good amount of money to be RB1. And I think he's going to be the bell cow of that offense. And I think he's going to be a guy that I think we're going to say, hey, he's going to be a top 10 fantasy running back for the next few weeks just because he's going to get the touches and, not so much the targets off and on the receiving end, but he's definitely going to get the touches. And I would say one more person to keep an eye out for the Cowboys, and I know this is probably like super off the radar, is Noah Brown. Just because he was a depth wide receiver, but surprisingly, he played 88% of snaps in the week 1 against the Bucks and had like the second most targets, tied with Dalton Schultz with 9. I think he had 5 for 68. 5 for 68. Cowboys looking for a number 2 wide receiver. Jalen Tolbert haven't been that guy, so maybe Noah Brown kind of sneaks up and become that guy because we know backup quarterbacks, they work a lot with depth, guys, running backs, receivers. Maybe him and Cooper Rush have that connection where he can start making some plays and really help out CeeDee Lamb because defenses now without no Dak are really going to try to make tough on Zeke and CeeDee Lamb.
I can't come up with his name. Number 1, not number 1 wide receiver. He wore the number 1 for the last couple of seasons for the Cowboys. Helped me out at wide receiver. And I can't come up with it now. It's not Gallup. He wore number 1. His jersey number was number 1, and he always used to come up in these games when the other receivers would be hurt. And I can't come up with his name right now. Anyway,
and then Cedric, if
Cedric Wilson. There you go.
Yeah, but he's in Miami now.
Yeah. So that's what it kind of reminds me of, an opportunity when other guys are hurt on this Dallas roster. An opportunity like a Cedric Wilson popped up for a few games. That could be the situation with Brown as well before Gallup gets back. I'm a little bit more concerned, I think, tonally here with what I think is happening with the removal of Dak from this offense for a couple of reasons. A couple of things on this, I should say. I think, first of all, if you have Dak on your roster, and this is my controversial point for the night, I guess. If you have Dak on your roster, you're actually in a much better position over the next couple of weeks than you are if you had one of Dak's pass catchers or Dak's running back, Ezekiel Elliott, on your roster because of what you all both had mentioned at different points, which is where you drafted these Cowboys stars. Dak Prescott amongst the elite quarterbacks that were likely taken within the first 5, I would say maybe 3 to 5 quarterbacks off the board. Pretty safe to say Dak was gone within that range. But still, when you're picking a top 5 quarterback, you don't have to necessarily reach unless something funky happens in your draft. You're usually able to get quarterbacks at a reasonable point in the draft. But if you're talking about getting one of these, talented playmakers, a CeeDee Lamb or an Ezekiel Elliott, you likely had to use a prime or a premier spot within your draft to get those guys. So I do think that it's going to be easier to replace the production of just Dak Prescott on your roster when you can get another quarterback that can perform in the top 10 or 12 guys easily each week, as opposed to replacing the talent that he's throwing to. I think on the other end of that, Ezekiel Elliott, we've seen him used a lot differently, let's say, in this Mike McCarthy system. Mike McCarthy's going to want to throw the ball. We saw it with Ben DiNucci. We saw it with, Millie Vanilli or whoever was playing quarterback for them last year. Garrett Gilbert, that's close enough. Last year, these are guys that were like, who? Have they ever thrown a pass ever at any point in their careers? No, but, this is something that I think that McCarthyism, history nerds will appreciate that one, will take over in this particular case. And I don't think that we see as much of Ezekiel Elliott as we might assume in this situation. A normal situation where your franchise quarterback goes down, you might assume that the franchise running back assumes that role. They just paid him. There's a lot of storylines and factors that are leading us to believe that Ezekiel Elliott should be the guy in this particular situation. But past experiences have told me under a Mike McCarthy system that running back is not going to get as much love as he should. And we're dealing with 2 talented backs in the backfield that are going to be used for different purposes as well. The game plan and the strategy, again, for winning games, I think could run negatively against these Cowboys playmakers. Just my own personal opinion. So if you're in that position, you may be thinking to yourself again after week one, even though I just discouraged this in the first segment, you may be thinking, hey, maybe I need to make a power move or make a splash in free agency to make up for the, assumed lost production that I have for these high draft or high round draft guys. So the strategy could be a little bit trickier. I guess I'm a little less confident, guys. That the quarterback situation won't necessarily affect the playmakers. But it's again, I think you have to pay attention to your roster construction. If you got Zeke or CeeDee Lamb for a steal, I don't think you're worried here. But if you did reach a little bit to ensure that those were your guys and you wanted to ensure that you got them on the team, maybe you are looking around for a few games and saying, hey, is there some sort of production that I can replace, especially if you're a Zeke or CeeDee Lamb owner?
No, you're definitely right about that. I think it does give people some pause. And you made a great point about, Ezekiel Elliott might not see that rise in production with Mike McCarthy as the head coach and with their emphasis on throwing the ball. They trust Cooper Rush, too. They've mentioned it a few times that Cooper Rush is a professional quarterback who knows their system and can kind of process the game at a high level. And in all likelihood, the Cowboys are going to be trailing in this game. They're playing the Cincinnati Bengals, a high-profile offense, obviously the best receiving trio in the league. It's likely the Cowboys are going to find themselves trailing, looking to throw the ball. Wouldn't surprise me if Cooper Rush wound up throwing the ball 30, 40 times. So right. I thought that was a great point, Keaton.
And the last time we saw Cooper Rush, start was last season. Last season where against the Vikings, he threw the ball. Like you said, he threw the ball at 24-40 for 325, 2 touchdowns and interception. Granted, the Vikings defense wasn't that spectacular, but goes to the notion what Harrison said, Cooper Rush, professional quarterback, he's been in the system for a while, and they're going to trust him to put that ball in the air. So I think plays are going to have to be made by those wide receivers for this to be successful at any point while Dak is out.
Yeah, I mean, and it could be a shorter injury for Dak too. So, major roster reconstruction probably shouldn't be within your purview. But if you're thinking to yourself, maybe is there something that I can do to increase the production over the next couple of weeks, especially if you took a loss in week one, let's say because you started Dak Prescott, or you took a loss in week one because you had one of these other stars in a starting, position. Then maybe the intensity becomes a little bit, more, it rises just a little bit. But again, keep in mind, 14-game season, we expect Dak to be back somewhere between 3 to 8, but probably on the lower end of that. You could already tell the media speculation around this, and Jerry Jones is in there trying to figure out if there's secret cells that he can insert into Dak Prescott's thumb that are worth billions or something. If he could afford it, I'm sure he would do that at this point. Pretty crazy. But anyway, moving on, we got certainly some performances in week one that were disappointing. I'm looking at you, Cam Akers. That's all I'm saying. I mean,
goodness.
To put up a double goose egg, as in 0.0, that's the way I look at that, right? You didn't just do 0, it's 2 zeros, and it hurts twice as bad. I do have Cam Akers shares in at least one of my leagues this season. I was actually pretty excited about Cam Akers coming into the season, and then boom, a dud in week one. So it reminded me, hey, look, there's probably a few other names on this list and guys that I know that you all have on your lists as well that dudded, if you will, if that is a verb, in week one, but we should remain confident in for week two. I'm actually going to go back to mine being Cam Akers on that level. I don't think that there's going to be a worse game from Cam Akers than what we saw in week one. The entire Rams organization looked like they were coming off the back end of a Super Bowl celebration or something along those lines. It just didn't look very good unless your name was Cooper Kupp last week. So I do anticipate that Cam Akers is going to have a very positive game script this week. I think that due to all the media hype and speculation around people asking, why didn't you use Cam Akers in week one? It's going to cause that coaching staff to really hone in, I think, on making him the star this week. So that is my pick for a dud in week one that I think we should absolutely lock into your lineup for week two. Gentlemen, what are you thinking about this? Who really disappointed you in week one that you're saying, you know what, going right back to him in week two?
Well, I think with the Cam Akers thing starting there, I think that was very surprising to a lot of people to see him just not get that usage, just not be involved in the offense. But if you listen to the preview pod we did last week, one of the things that we all kind of mentioned was Darrell Henderson was vastly undervalued this year, going undrafted in the leagues and going in the last round in leagues. I mean, that was just crazy. They worked in a kind of a duo last year. The Rams have always liked to mix multiple guys in, so Darrell Henderson was definitely undervalued this year. Cam Akers is a guy that I'm expecting. Like you said, I think that was his worst game of the year. I think that was a great point. I think that was his lowest. So that's a really good one right there. Some duds that I have, I'll start here at home. Devontae Smith was catchless last week against the Lions. I know that caught a lot of people by surprise. A.J. Brown had 10 catches, I think like 13, 14 targets. It was a crazy number of targets. I think that's going to balance out. I think that's going to even out. Anytime you see, a crazy outlier of a performance like that, I think that's going to even out. We're going to see Devontae Smith more involved this week against the Vikings on Monday Night Football, home opener, prime time. I could see Devontae having a nice bounce back week. Along those lines, another receiver, Allen Robinson. We talked about Cam Akers and his, lack of usage. Allen Robinson had a lot of high expectations joining the Rams, best quarterback he's ever played with. Really was a flatline performance, had 2 targets. One of them was a jump ball at the end of the game. Very disappointing, got outplayed by some, lesser receivers, some guys that are just not Allen Robinson's caliber. So again, I think that's going to even out. I don't think A.J. Terrell will be on him as much. I think they're probably going to shadow A.J. Terrell and Cooper Kupp. That could give Allen Robinson some extra opportunities. That Falcons secondary isn't as deep, you know what I mean? So I like Allen Robinson to bounce back this week. Those would be my 2.
I like both. I and it's funny that y'all bring up the Rams because I think I probably was the only one on like Darrell Henderson Jr. Island when it came to Darrell Henderson because it seemed like everybody was talking about Akers, and I was like, oh, Darrell Henderson, because I just was reading stuff, and it just going back to the summer, like we said, and just knowing how the Rams do their running game. Right, last season there was no Cam Akers, but it was literally Sony Michel and Darrell Henderson. And Sony Michel didn't really get going until like middle to the end of last season, like towards the middle to the rest of the season. It was really Darrell Henderson. So I wasn't surprised that Henderson. I think I was kind of surprised that Henderson started out the game as the lead running back. I kind of thought it was going to be Akers, and then they mixed in Henderson. But then as we didn't see Akers for a long time, I was like, oh, this is actually really going to happen. So yeah, if you had Cam Akers stock, it wasn't great, but I wouldn't be concerned just yet because I think he's going to have his moments this season. Allen Robinson, like you said, he's another good one. I think everybody and their mom had Allen Robinson to score a touchdown on Thursday night last week, and that went horribly, horribly wrong. But Sean McVay came out this week and said that they want to get him the ball and get him involved in the offense. So I trust and believe that they will make it happen because I have a feeling that Atlanta is going to try to double and triple team Cooper Kupp. So somebody's going to be open. But for me, I think some of the duds for me, I don't want to call them duds per se. I think they were just like abnormal situations.
Disappointments.
Yeah, disappointing. Disappointing.
Under expectations.
Yeah, there we go. Under expectations. For me, Amari Cooper, just because of him shockingly getting traded from the Cowboys to the Browns. He didn't not say he didn't play well in week 1. It was just so more the situation, I think, and just how the game was being schemed against the Browns offense, and it obviously allowed Donovan People-Jones to have a better game. I think 6 catches for about 60 yards. It allowed him to eat, but Amari Cooper only had 3 receptions for 17 yards and 6 targets. I don't see another type of performance coming from Cooper like that for the rest of the season. I think that was an anomaly, almost like Nick Chubb not scoring a touchdown last week as well. I think that was an anomaly happening. So I think Amari Cooper, he was a dud, but I think he will, like Harrison said about Robinson, I think Cooper bounces back this week against a Jet secondary that really got exposed last week by Rashard Bateman and Devin Duvernay, who are not the class of wide receiver that Amari Cooper is. So I expect Cooper to get off in that game. And another guy, I don't want to say he was a dud, but disappointing was more DJ Moore. Again, another guy who I think a lot of people in just the fantasy football, DFS, betting, whatever, everybody has, big hopes for DJ Moore, especially with Sam Darnold not being at quarterback this year. It's more so Baker Mayfield, so it's a little better.
I love that. Not with Baker Mayfield at quarterback, but with Sam Darnold not at quarterback. I love
right, exactly.
I love that.
Exactly. So, and knowing that, having Baker at quarterback, I think a lot of people expected him to have a big breakout game, especially against. But again, they were going against a tough defense, and obviously, weirdly enough, same game, right? They're going against a tough defense, and the Browns. Browns defense is very good, but he didn't have the best of games. He only had 3 catches for 43 yards. And 6 targets. Again, for me, that's not enough target share for a guy who I think is a very, very good wide receiver. And again, I think he bounces back as well. I think he has a big game against the New York Giants. We saw the Giants secondary. They looked better, but still gave up some yards and some catches to 2 rookie wide receivers for the Titans and Kyle Phillips and Treylon Burks, who, we didn't know what Treylon was going to do, but Harrison stuck with him and believed. So there you go.
That's your boy coming into the year.
Fingers crossed. I got my fingers
Said
crossed.
it on the pod. Yeah, we got it recorded now. So
those are just 2 guys to me that come to mind who I think a lot of people had high expectations for, and it just didn't happen for them. But I wouldn't press the panic button on either, because we know those 2 guys are going to get theirs regardless.
It's week 1, folks. It's week 1. I mean, if you take we understand that players are going to have bad weeks. If you have a bad week in week 6, it almost seems like a lot easier to do something with that or to handle that situation. When you have a bad week in week 1, it suddenly becomes like the narrative for the entire season sometimes with these guys. Be patient with your stars, especially the guys that you got in there to fill a specific role. Your wide receiver 2. I'm drafting this guy to be my wide receiver 2 because of the way that I built the rest of my roster. It means you got to stick with them. And also, having some patience is going to pay off with some of these guys, as you mentioned. They're not going to be down every single week. So don't be afraid to stick these guys in your lineup. That's what you drafted them for. You didn't draft them to have one bad performance and then suddenly, discard them or have to think twice every time you want to put them in a lineup. So, definitely some good names on that list as well. Put them on the board. Put them in your lineup. Let's do it. You did mention a few running backs there. I've found that the usage of running backs over the last couple of seasons, and probably this goes back even further than just the last few, gentlemen, but running backs are being used a lot differently in the league. And I'm wondering if we have seen the days of a bell cow guaranteed 30 touches, 20 to 30 touches, a week. I wonder if we've seen the end of that. This next topic sort of reminds us of that situation. These are running backs that did really well in week 1. Can we trust them in week 2? I think that folds into this conversation because it's hard to find a bell cow running back. Running back's going to handle all the carries. Running back's going to get so much work that you can lock him into your lineup and absolutely forget it. These days, rarely is that an absolute lock. So we got a couple names definitely on this list, and I'm wondering exactly if these guys can be trusted in week 2. Miles Sanders is first up on this list, and gentlemen, I know you have a lot to say probably on this one as well. Miles Sanders, though, he looked good in week 1, and I believe he did something that we didn't see almost all of the entire year last year, right?
Yes, the feed Miles Sanders movement is back and is better than ever.
It's back.
It's back. Feed Miles Sanders, rinse and repeat movement is here. But I think he surprised us all, right? Because I think, even when we did our pod, not last week, but the week before, when we were just talking about guys who, value it, he just dropped in the draft, and it's kind of like you don't know what to expect. He was like the poster child for it. Like, you did not know what to expect from Miles Sanders just because he didn't score no rushing touchdowns last year. It was like over 600 something days he didn't score a rushing touchdown until last Sunday. So you knew that. You knew the Eagles running back room. They do running back by committee again. There's no lead back, so you don't know who's going to get those goal line carries, who's going to be mixed in there. And then you got a quarterback in Jalen Hurts who can easily, take the ball himself and score in the end zone. And for a guy like Miles Sanders, he's not going to be like your Nick Chubbs or even your James Robinsons, your Jonathan Taylors, your Dalvin Cooks, like guys that you can either depend on. A, they're going to get 100 rushing yards, or B, they're going to get a ton of rushing touchdowns. He's kind of in that, like he's in the middle of that category. He doesn't fit that. So he's very touchdown dependent. So if you get a touchdown from him, it's great. Your fantasy value's up. If he doesn't, it's not good. And I think he definitely impressed us last week, going for 13 carries for 96 yards and a touchdown, and played 52% of snaps, 16.5 fantasy points. And if you had him in DFS, almost 20 and a half, almost 20 points. I think you couldn't ask for anything better for Sanders, especially because this is a contract year for him as well.
Yeah.
I think with Sanders and kind of like you were mentioning, Keaton, it's hard to guarantee that there's a bell cow back. I think that there's top backs. There's your lead back. Miles Sanders is the Eagles' lead back. He's their most talented, most complete, whatever you want to call it, running back. But it really is. I mean, it's by committee now in the NFL. The volume that we saw Najee Harris, the Steelers guy last year, it's very uncommon to see that many carries go to one specific running back. You really do. You work it by committee. You get different guys who can do different things for you. One more physical, a little bit more of a pass catching back. It kind of balances the offense out too, in a way. Not only does it keep hits off running backs, it balances it for the offense. I think it makes it a more well-versed, dynamic offenses for different offenses. But yeah, you guys mentioned it. Miles Sanders, 13 for 96, 1 touchdown. That's definitely a very encouraging game. Encouraging for the Eagles. I still think that Jalen Hurts is probably the Eagles' top rusher statistically this year, and for fantasy purposes. I think if you're looking for who's going to be the statistical leader and the best rusher for the Eagles, I think it's Jalen Hurts. I think especially in the red zone. I think that volume-wise, it's still Jalen Hurts. He led the Eagles in carries this week. But I think Miles Sanders definitely, that's an encouraging game. You want to see more like that. That 13 touches, 2 catches roll, around 15 total touches, I think that's perfect. I think if they can kind of live in that window, a little bit less, a little bit more, given the flow of the game, I think that's perfect. So really encouraging night for Miles Sanders.
For sure. And especially for a guy that previously, this was kind of the polar opposite question we were asking about Miles Sanders. Instead of saying, this is a running back that went off in week 2, can we trust him in week 1? Went off in week 1, rather, can we trust him in week 2? We were saying quite the opposite. He should have gone off in week 1, but he didn't. Can we trust him to go off in week 2? Much different conversation about Miles Sanders, which I think makes it interesting. But let's not maybe get too high on the idea that a back that waited all this time to finally find his way into the end zone is necessarily going to repeat that. Although the game script certainly looked, pretty good offensively. It seemed to, the offense seemed to flow. They scored a ton of points last week as well. So certainly something to pay attention to. We do have another name on this. I want to get to Saquon Barkley, though, guys, because this was another one where I think there was a huge amount of anticipation, waiting for Saquon to come off of this major injury again. Drafted in the same draft as Miles Sanders, almost the same conversation. Saquon, so good at one point in time during his rookie year, of course, and shortly subsequently after that. But, is Saquon back to being that guy in this Giants offense? It doesn't really seem like there's a whole lot of other threatening playmakers in that offense. Is this a back that we can trust after a huge week 1 performance to come and do that in week 2 and beyond that as well?
Man, the question with Saquon will never be about talent. I think if he's healthy, you lock and load him, start him in your lineup, and you really don't think too much about it. I think if he's on the field and there's not, practice reports and worries of that, I think he's in that running back 1 spot, and I think even last year, before that Bears game, before his massive injury, he's still a productive player. He's a guy who can contribute in the pass game. Obviously, 21-20 victory over the Titans. It wasn't a high-scoring offensive night. Daniel Jones still is not, a guaranteed lock and a guy that you really feel comfortable with. But what I will say is they're going to look to get the ball out of his hands quick. They're going to look to get the ball into Saquon's hands different ways. I can see him contributing in that pass-catching game. 18 for 164 and 1. What really caught my eye, though, was the 7 targets. 6 receptions for 30 yards, but he had 7 targets. So I'm intrigued by Saquon. I mean, knock on wood, I really hope that he can put it together this year and stay on the field and really show off all of his talents, because he's an unbelievable athlete. He's an unbelievable football player. When he's on the field, he's very fun to watch. It's better for the NFL for Saquon to be out there on the field. So, I think if he's out there, you're definitely starting him.
Yeah, most definitely. I'm gonna piggyback off of you and agree there. If he's healthy, then you start him. Obviously, I don't think he was healthy last year, obviously, but again, he was only a 1 year removed from tearing that ACL back during the pandemic season. Actually, it was the pandemic season he tore his ACL, tore his knee up. So 1 year removed last year, wasn't the same. Now he's 2 years removed. Now we're seeing the guy that we saw, like you said, in his rookie year. That was almost like Penn State, like vintage, like Saquon.
It
like,
was, yeah.
Being a guy that, again, you look at it, like you said, Harrison, 18 carries, 164 yards. You do the yards per carry on that math. That's ridiculous. That's ridiculous. That's double digits, right? And then, like you said, him being a weapon in the receiving game, that's going to be huge. And they're going to need it just because this Giants wide receiver unit, it's a lot of question marks, right? Yeah. Kenny Golladay hasn't lived up to the guy that we saw in Detroit. You know, Kadarius Toney is still young. Wan'Dale Robinson, I think he got hurt in week 1, so we don't know about that. Sterling Shepard's a reliable target, but again, he's coming back from an injury that he suffered last season.
Yeah.
So he's getting back into it. So this is, like you said, this is setting up for a prime opportunity where I know we talked about like fantasy players of the year, where we could be talking about potentially Saquon in that same vein.
Right. Yeah.
If things really start to pick up for him. And I think him starting off was good, and I think he has a very favorable matchup this week against the Panthers, just because we saw the Panthers really struggle against Kareem Hunt and Nick Chubb last week. So this could be another situation where Saquon Barkley could have another huge game coming up.
Yeah. I mean, fantasy player of the year. I don't think he was on any of our radars in the preseason pod. But certainly something that I think you saw after week 1, a guy that has massive talent, eat, so to speak. I don't think there's anyone else in this Giants offense that says to me, I'm gonna be the guy that's gonna take carries away from Saquon Barkley. I'm gonna outshine this in this offense so much that I'm gonna take carries away from Saquon. Absolutely not. I think you put it in his hands as many times as you can. Now, the longevity conversation, are they gonna do that for the next 4, 5, 6 seasons? Probably not sustainable, given those injury concerns that you have there. We've got other situations, just real quickly to mention, like in Green Bay, for example. You know, Aaron Jones used to get a lot of work, right? But the idea is A.J. Dillon is here to ensure that we have not just a running back to spell Aaron Jones, but a running back that's actually going to play in the role in the offense and splitting those carries, those hits, you know, that a running back can take on a consistent basis. We're seeing that a lot more. We see it in Denver. We see it, you know, in so many other places as well. And so I do have that belief that, you know, in time, most running back rooms will probably look like some version of a split. But this one right here, and New York for the Giants, absolutely. I think it's Saquon, and then after that, it's more Saquon. And any other sort of game plan that doesn't follow that, I think, is absolutely ridiculous. But that's just my 2 cents. That's why I'm not a coach in the NFL, probably. I play more Madden than anything else. But anyhow, I did have DeAndre Swift on this list as well. If we could just take a second on this one. This is a running back. He finished in the top, he was a top 7 running back last year in the NFL. A guy that got so many of his points in garbage time. Jared Goff seemed to find him certainly a lot in that role. He sort of reprised that on Sunday with a very productive day from there as well. Is this another sort of situation, real quick, from each of you, where kind of like, so long as he's healthy, you keep starting DeAndre Swift, right? Like, you don't have any lack of confidence in Swift here.
Yeah, no, I think you keep rolling him out. He's a PPR machine. Like we've been talking about this whole segment, a little bit of a running back duo with him and Jamal Williams. Like, there could be some red zone touches that DeAndre Swift loses, but the value that he brings in the pass game, the dynamic playmaker he is, he's definitely in your lineup.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, same thing. I think you're going to start him. Again, this is a guy who a lot of people pegged him to be that like top 10 running back in fantasy. And I think that continues. The only thing, like you said, the only thing that stops him is Jamal Williams being the touchdown vulture inside the goal line. Other than that, I think he has to continue to keep up. You know, he said, then he said he wanted to be like 1,000-yard receiver and 1,000-yard rusher this year. And
Let's do it. Marshall Faulk your way into the books, my friend.
I mean, he's, like you said, Harrison, he's capable. I mean, look at the numbers: 15 carries for 144 yards, ran strong, ran physical, did a little bit in the receiving game. He's really a talented running back. I think when the Lions got him in the draft that year, I think that was the T. Higgins draft, the Justin Jefferson draft, to get him in the second round where they did. I think it was a steal, because I think he's going to be very good behind, I think, a very solid offensive line. And then you just look at the matchup who they have this week against who they play, the Commanders. Looking at the Commanders, Commanders, they did their thing against the run last week, only giving them the 85 to the Jags with James Robinson and and Etienne, but Swift brings a different dynamic than both of those guys, in that he's both of those guys in one running back. So I'm looking forward to it, seeing how he does and see how he tries to do that. Well, can we say he'll get 144 yards next on Sunday? No. Again, temper your expectations. He's not going to do that. And he's not probably going to give you 23 and a half fantasy points. It's not going to happen. But if he can give you half of that, 15, I think we'll all take that, right? If you have him on your team, you'll take it because that's a great ceiling, for him and his caliber. So definitely excited to see how the rest of his, season progresses.
Absolutely. If you have Swift, you're rolling him out there. Don't think about it. Keep going. There's a couple of the names that we talked about again in fantasy that you're going to want to keep consistently in your lineup. It's just going to work that way. All right. To wrap up this conversation, we've got some of the best betting minds in the country. I'm not exaggerating, folks, right here in front of us. I want you guys to give me your anytime touchdowns for this week. This is just kind of a fun prop thing that we can do. And maybe one of these guys finds your way into your lineup, maybe that was on your bench before. Who are your guys for that list right now? Guaranteed touchdown to wrap.
Yeah, we got to start with Jovan here. I want to hear who Jovan's got.
Oh, man, so much pressure.
Putting you on the hot seat, Joe.
Putting you
on the hot seat, man.
So much pressure. So for me, I got a few off the bat. First off, I went Lamar Jackson anytime touchdown. Lamar didn't have no rushing touchdowns last week, obviously, because he was just doing a beautiful job airing it out against that Dolphins. I mean, not Dolphins, the Jets defense. Now he fakes the Dolphins, who were very good who did a very good job of stopping the run last week. But we know Lamar is going to finally get his way into the end zone somehow, some way. Especially if the Dolphins want to take away Mark Andrews in the red zone, I could see Lamar finding his way in the red zone. So that's one I've already played. And then another guy who I just mentioned earlier in our show, and that is DJ Moore. I think DJ Moore finds his way to get a touchdown this week. I think, him not getting anything it was again matchup, probably being matched up on Cleveland's best, corner, and knowing the type of defensive line that the Browns have, it's not going to be a lot of time to get that ball out to get his DJ Moore. I think DJ Moore bounces back and scores a touchdown against the Giants, who are surprisingly favored this week, which I don't understand at all.
What do you think, Harrison? Who's absolutely scoring a touchdown this week in your mind?
Well, I've got a lock for you, and it's an unfortunate lock considering, like I've said a few times, we're in this Philadelphia area, but I'm going to go with Justin Jefferson. Monday Night Football, taking on the Eagles. That just feels too easy. That just feels like a touchdown the Eagles are letting up all day, every day. We saw Deshaun Jackson used to open up the season and just kill the Eagles on long touchdowns. I could see something like that for Justin Jefferson. A nice 70-yard from Kirk Cousins early in the game or something like that. So I'll lock that one in. And then just for a couple guys who maybe are a little under radar, if you want to just throw a couple dollars on, maybe make a nice little play day on. I like Corey Davis from the Jets. He saw a lot of targets from Flacco last week. Flacco threw the ball like almost 60 times. They're gonna have to even that out. Get Breece Hall involved.
Give or take, yeah.
Or something. I think it was legit like 59 attempts. Like it was crazy amount.
Yeah.
But with that said, in a betting perspective, I think Corey Davis, that's a guy that they paid a lot of money. That's a guy that they leave on the field a lot. I think he could be an interesting one. Good odds there. And then Curtis Samuel with the Washington Commanders. He's a guy that they just used in so many different ways last week. Caught a lot of passes, saw a lot of targets, but then also his rushing involvement, the way that they're getting him involved. I just think that they like to get the ball in his hands, utilize him in different ways. Maybe something funky happens where he gets a nice little long touchdown this week.
I like those picks, guys. Really like I really like that Commanders offense for some reason. I don't necessarily like them to be a force in terms of real football and like them to be fearful in real football. But I think there's going to be a lot of negative game script for the Commanders this year. They're going to throw the ball a lot. I know we like to knock Carson Wentz for a number of reasons, but the guy's going to be able to throw the football. But during the course of the season, they're going to get a lot. Curtis Samuel's a guy that has shown he can run the football, and is a pretty proficient receiver whenever he gets targets. So we'll see in that potentially high volume offense, like how that plays out with a guy like with a guy like Curtis Samuel. How about Deebo Samuel? I don't think of any relation. I could be wrong there, but Deebo Samuel. Deebo Samuel, I think, has a great chance of scoring this week as well. So lock him into your lineups. Reason being here, you lost Elijah Mitchell as a starting running back. Deebo Samuel already has taken on a pretty significant share of the running back carries or the running plays, designed runs, and that offense as well. I think that only increases his value. And again, you look at other playmakers in this offense. They maybe get Kittle back this week, but either way, I think Deebo Samuel's, especially in that offense, when they need to score, they're going to want to turn it around this week after a slow start last week in Chicago. Lock it in. Deebo Samuel scored last week. He's going to score this week too. That is my pick.
It's not a bad one. Like Deebo did have a rushing touchdown last week, but 8 receptions, 8 carries for 52 yards. It's rushing prop right now on DraftKings is 31.5. So it's definitely possible. Doesn't need that many to get there. So, and like you said, no Elijah Mitchell. Don't know how much we're going to see of Jeff Wilson Jr., who has dealt with his own injuries over the years, but we'll see how they work him in and other guys. So yeah, Deebo, anytime touchdown looks pretty good if you can get it at a right price.
Absolutely. Make sure you check all the odds. Make sure you check all the best places. Jovan, speaking of, where can we find you and your work? If I'm saying, what other kind of locks can I get in here? What other kind of good advice for the weekend, this huge weekend of fantasy matchups this week? Where can they find you and your work online?
Yeah, so pretty much, obviously, follow me on Twitter at Jovan10. Obviously, follow Total Sports Live at Total Sports Live. Check out my stuff, sportingnews.com. And then, obviously, Total Sports Live always got stuff up there on the website. So, yeah, that's pretty much how we do it.
Harrison, how about you? Where can we find you on the socials in case people want to pick your fantasy brain as well?
Well, first of all, I want to emphasize that Jovan is out here making people money. Okay, it's that time of year where Jovan is coming clutch.
I've been telling people, man.
If you need a little bit of extra money for the holidays, we got gifts coming up.
Come on now.
Jovan 10, go to Sporting News. We're going to take care of you, all right? So let's start there. But if y'all want to tap in after y'all get done with Jovan stuff, come on over to mine at Harry Brown-Russo. A lot of good stuff coming up. Penn football starts this weekend. Excited to get over to Franklin Field on Saturday, taking on the Colgate Raiders. A lot of interesting FCS prospects there. So be making my rounds around this New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware area to some college football games in the next month or two. So, yeah, definitely check out TotalSportsLive.com. Appreciate y'all. Always a pleasure. Keaton, always a pleasure talking with you. Jovan, likewise. So, yeah, most definitely. Great show.
Appreciate you two coming on as well, and appreciate you guys letting me host the podcast tonight. That was a lot of fun. For sure, make sure you check me out at Keaton D. Nichols, for sure, for more on me. Hey, listen, I'm a social media guy, but I'm like a watcher right now at this point in my career. I like watching a lot, but you can still follow me. I got a lot of really good stuff up there, and it's a good way of keeping up with what's happening on the podcast as well. So, all right, gentlemen, until next week, good luck and everybody out there for your fantasy teams, your rosters. Don't forget to set your lineups, and make sure you listen to the TSL podcast every time that we have one. It's worth it. Total Sports Live. Make sure you're searching us on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Anchor, all of that. Make sure you follow on Twitter at the Total Sports Live, right? I'm sorry, at Total Sports Live,
Yes.
as well on Twitter to keep up with everything TSL. Thanks again, everybody. Have a good one, and good luck Sunday.